My books, The Origin of Names, Words, and Everything in Between, volumes 1 and 2, are available to purchase from most major booksellers in all major formats. Order your copies today so you can enjoy these books for yourself and help support the channel. The Roman Empire did a lot of impressive things which helped shape our modern world. Sewers, road, and concrete, mainstays of our modern world, were all invented by the Romans. We've all seen The Life of Brian. We know the Romans did a lot for us. Yet, not every Roman invention has been able to stand the test of time. And, speaking of time, it's Roman timekeeping we are looking into today. How Rome tracked the passing of time is somewhat different in various ways in comparison to our management of time. This might seem weird, because at its core, the passage of time has been the same for the entirety of human history. Days have always been the same amount of time, as has the time it takes for the moon to orbit the Earth and the Earth to orbit the sun. This is all true, and while the passing of time is something that occurs naturally without us interfering or to make it so, the art of timekeeping unto itself is very much a human-made construct. It was us who decided that a day should be split into 24 units of time named hours, or that 7 days should constitute a calendar week, and so on. That's how we track time now, but throughout human history, people have concocted different ways to track time and have used different names for various aspects of it, whether that be different names for parts of the year, month, or even days of the week. For context, the modern calendar most of us use today, properly named the Gregorian calendar, only started being adopted in 1582, which really shows us just how much thought and, well, time went into making a concept that pretty much all of us take for granted now and don't really think twice about. Yet, this video isn't about how we track time. We want to know how the Romans were doing it, and by doing it I mean tracking time. I'm sure there's plenty of other videos explaining how Romans did that kind of thing out there. The original Roman calendar was apparently created by Romulus himself, the land's mythical first king. If you look at this Roman calendar, the first thing you'll most likely notice, in regards to it being different to ours, is the fact that it only has 10 months. This is because the depths of winter weren't actually assigned months. They were just a mess of days between the end of one year and the start of another. This might sound odd, but you must remember a main reason we track time is for farming and harvesting reasons. And as none of that could really take place during this time in Rome, what was the point of tracking it? Personally, I'm well on board with the idea of making winter this wilderness period void of actually tracking time or anything for that matter. Winter sucks and we should all just stop trying to do anything during it. Eventually, this idea of winter being a timeless nothingness would cease to be, and the misery that is January and February were created to track this time too. So while this 12-month Roman calendar might seem more familiar to us, within these months things start to get different. Roman months revolved around the phases of the moon, and while our modern months are inspired by this same concept, they don't actually follow the moon's phases all that thoroughly. Rome's months adhered to the moon with precision, meaning a new month would always start on a specific phase of the moon, and specific days would correlate to other phases too. This worked, somewhat. You can probably figure this out for yourself, but having months that strictly followed the cycle of the moon meant that things would get out of whack pretty easily in Roman timekeeping. In fact, things got so out of sync at times that every couple of years, the Romans needed to add an extra month to the calendar to get things back in order, which was named Mercedonius. This sounds odd, but it's kind of like our modern concept of the leap day, which once again came about via the Romans later down the line. Though the biggest difference between Roman months and our months has to be the way in which specific days were referred to. Romans had names for days of the week like we do now, Monday, Wednesday, and so on. But what they didn't use were specific numbers for days of the month. We have concepts like the 4th of July, the 25th of December, the 14th of February. I'm sure you know what dates are, right? Rome, however, did not have dates in this way. So if they didn't have numbers for their days of the month, what did they have instead? Well, in place of numbers to split up months, Rome instead split months into 3 specific periods of time, with the start of each of these 3 periods marked by a specific day in the month. These 3 days, which set the tone for the rest of the month, were called the calends, the nons, and the ides. Each of these days landed on specific phases of the moon each and every month. The first of those being the calends. The calends was always the day in which there was a new moon, as the word calends simply comes from the Latin calendare, which means first day of the month. It may possibly come from an old word meaning to shout. This might come from the idea when a new moon was sighted, priests would shout about it and declare the start of a new month. And if you couldn't guess, this Latin word of calends would eventually give us the modern word of calendar, so it has some use, I suppose. Following the calends, however, would be the nons. This day was always during the moon's first quarter phase. This name means something along the lines of the 9th day, simply because the nons would often come around 9 days before the next big day of the month, the ides. The ides always landed on the day of the full moon. The leading theory on where the word of ides comes from is that it might come from an older Etruscan word meaning divide, as this concept helped divide the months up into sections. So that gives us the calends, the nons, and the ides, which despite all ending with s aren't plural. That's all well and good, but that's only 3 days of the month, and months are composed of way more than just 3 days. So what do we do with the other 27 or so days of the month? Did they go by specific names in relation to the moon too, or did they just go by numbers like we do? Well, what if I told you it was kind of a bit of both? The other days of the month, which didn't land on the calends, nons, or ides, were instead named in reference to how close they were to the next lunar phase / part of the month. The time between the calends, nons, and ides varied from month to month, of course, as that was the nature of the moon and these things. But there was a similar enough time between them to help with tracking these things. There was roughly around just under a week between the calends and the nons. So the day after the calends of January, an example, would be referred to as something like 4 days before the nons of January, or as it would be in Latin, ante diem 4 nons Januarius. This means that the next day would be referred to as 3 days before the nons of January, and it would continue like that until you reached the nons, and that day would simply be called the nons of January. Then of course the day after the nons, the countdown to the ides would begin. The period between the nons and the ides was normally just over a week, 9 days as the etymology of nons tells us. So it means the day after the nons of January could be referred to as 9 days before the ides of January, and onwards until you reach the ides. Once the ides itself passes, you start counting down to the calends of the next month. There's a pretty big gap between the ides and the calends. It can be over 2 weeks, so the day after the ides of January could be referred to as 19 days before the calends of February, until once again you reach the calends, then rinse and repeat. It's also worth knowing that the day before the calends, nons, or ides had a unique name unto themselves too. It was known as the Pridi. This simply means before the day, and can be roughly translated into English as pre-day. This means that you would rarely say 2 days before one of these marker days. It would instead go 4 days, 3 days, Pridi, then the day itself. The marker day itself was also part of the counting down too, which I find a little confusing, but maybe that's just me. But maybe it wasn't just me who found this all a little confusing, as Rome itself ditched this month system in the 1st century BC. They instead gave each month a set amount of days, as opposed to strictly following the moon. But while set days were now in place, that old naming system of the calends, nons, and ides stuck around. These titles referred to specific days of the month, even if they didn't always line up with the moon phase the title initially reflected. The calends was the name given to the first day of the month. This was the same for each and every month of the Roman year. I say this because the days the nons and the ides landed on changed depending on the amount of days featured in that specific month. If a month featured 31 days, then the nons would be on the 7th day of that month, and the 5th day of other months. The ides landed on the 15th of 31-day months, and the 13th of other months. This put things somewhat in line with the modern calendar system. Kind of anyway. For example, the nons of April landed on the 5th day of that month, meaning that the day after it was technically the 6th day of April, but no one would have actually called it the 6th of April. It would instead have been called 8 days before the ides of April. It's all a little silly and dumb, so it should come as no surprise that this calendar system was eventually scrapped altogether, with different ones being used across the world until the current system was settled on. Something cool we can do, however, is correlate modern dates with the Roman calendar system. So if for some reason you wanted to track time like a Roman, you can very well do that. Take the day this video is going live on an example, the 15th of March 2024. As March is a 31-day month, it means that the ides would land on the 15th, meaning today is in fact the Ides of March. Yeah, I finally said the thing. The Ides of March is perhaps the most recognizable date in the Roman calendar system. Even people who've never studied this calendar have probably heard the term the Ides of March. The reason it is so well known is because it was on this day in 44 BC that Julius Caesar was assassinated. The name of this day became cemented in popular history, however, due to a play written by William Shakespeare about the emperor himself, in which a soothsayer warns him about the upcoming date, uttering the famous line, "Beware the Ides of March." Whether this was actually told to Caesar seems to be a debated subject. Whatever the case, this line from the play has turned the 15th of March into something of a bad omen to this very day. It's up to you to decide if you feel that this day is actually cursed or not. But what's interesting is that some other pretty noteworthy things have happened on this day, good and bad. For example, on the 15th of March 1493, Columbus returned to Spain after his first voyage to the New World. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the Russian throne in 1917,
1917 on the 15th of March. Germany invaded Czechoslovakia in 1939 on the 15th of March. The Godfather was released in the cinemas in 1972 on the 15th of March. And perhaps most importantly, on the 15th of March 1975, will.i.am of the Black Eyed Peas was born. So this day has had a lot of importance throughout history, but in all honesty, you're probably just as likely to get stabbed by a group of senators on any day of the month, not just on the Ides of March.
Name Explain depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explain videos, and your name at the end of the video with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/NameExplain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and once again, thank you all so much.